Alfred Hitchcock said it best when he says you try to make movies where they don't have to read the subtitles in Japan. So you try to make movies, you know. For this, it needs to be big. Yeah.
Hey, I'm Kim Taylor-Bennett, and welcome to this first episode of Vice Talks Film. Today, I'm joined by Academy Award-winning director George Miller, who released his first film 36 years ago. Now he's back with another installment of Mad Max, Fury Road.
My world is fire and blood.
Everything is dependent on oil.
We are killing for gasoline.
The world is almost out of water. Water.
Now there's the water wars.
Here they come again. Everybody's gone out of their mind.
Thanks for joining us today.
Great. Yeah, thank you.
So actually, the film was only completed properly, like, what, 2 weeks ago?
We've just finished off the 3D stereo. With a film like this, you've got to get that right, so otherwise it can hurt people's eyes, and a lot of action, so you've got to get it really creamy.
How does it feel after 16 years? 16 years since you first thought of this idea, right?
Yeah, it was a movie which you kind of, every time it sort of almost get up, something would happen and it would fall down. I went on to other movies and get up again. You kind of couldn't kill it with a stick, as I say. And eventually we got to make it after a long time and just finished. So it's been a long time coming, but somehow it insisted on getting made, so it's good.
And then when there were all these setbacks, 9/11, the Australian dollar collapsing, the desert that you thought you were going to shoot in turning into a wetland.
Yeah, and a flower garden.
A flower garden. And then, you know, thinking you were going to have Mel Gibson reprise the role and then that kind of not really working out. Was there ever a point where you were like, you know what, this is probably cursed, I should, like, leave this alone?
There wasn't that, because that's the nature of the film business, you know. There's always, you have a number of things going, and there's one that sort of that sort of drives you, and but if it falls away, if it's good enough, it keeps coming back. And people kept on wanting to make the movie. Studios wanted to make the movie, so it was just a matter of getting it all sort of lined up and the right things happening. I mean, when we broke the drought in the outback of Australia, we got the flower garden. The studio, Warner Brothers, were great. They just said, well, let's wait a year, because all the locals said it will dry out, but it didn't dry out enough. So we had to move from the east coast of Australia to the west coast of Africa and Namibia, where it never rains, and we shot it, because this is a movie that's real vehicles and real people and real desert. It had to be old school. There are no flying humans. It's not a green screen movie, so we had to shoot it for real. And I think that makes the movie feel very, very authentic, and you know, all the action and so on. Everything you see on the screen happened. I mean, we did use CG for harnessing, you know, to erase harnesses, to change skies, to erase our tracks, and to create a big toxic dust storm and things like that. But for the most part, it's yeah, and it was tough, but it was worth it. Yeah.
You done this before?
Many times. Now that I drive a war rig, this is the best shot I'll ever have.
And them?
They're looking for hope.
What about you?
Redemption.
Let's talk a little bit about the characters. To me, the star of the film is CHARLIZE THERON. I mean, Tom Hardy is fantastic, but I'm just much more interested in her character. Yeah. Did you write this role with her in mind, or did she come about a different way?
I didn't write it with her in mind. The basic idea was, apart from doing a chase, that the thing that everyone was fighting over was human cargo. And so there were the 5 wives, the only healthy creatures in the Wasteland capable of breeding an heir for the warlord, the Immortan Joe. So they needed a female road warrior. A road warrior had to be female, so Furiosa was that. Once we wrote it, I couldn't think of anyone else other than CHARLIZE. She's a person of stature in both in the spirit and physically. She was a ballet dancer, so she's got all that skill set, discipline. Dancers have to be incredibly disciplined. They can convey emotion with gesture, and she's one of those sort of fearless actors. She calls me and says, "I want to shave my hair." She wouldn't the Furiosa wouldn't mess with hair in the heat and dust, and she emerged, as that character, and so it rose sort of out of the architecture of the story.
And what about Tom Hardy? Was it a struggle to think who could possibly reprise the role of Mad Max?
Yes, it was. There's not many people with that kind of charisma, particularly apart from the skill set. You need someone who, on the one hand, is very lovable, and on the other hand, has that element of danger and mystery. And because for characters who don't say much, you need to see a lot of stuff going on inside. And he was the first one who walked through the door that reminded me of Mel 30 years before. You may know that Tom was 6 weeks old when we shot the first Mad Max.
Yeah.
and it was funny to think of that. In fact, at the premiere in Los Angeles, I sat with Mel on one side and Tom on the other.
You're two animalistic heroes.
Yes.
I love this idea, or I love the fact that you brought on the Vagina Monologues author to talk to the girls.
Eve Ensler.
Yeah. How did that come about? Was this sort of feminist thread in the script early on, or did someone suggest that you bring her on to talk to the girls?
No, just as we had hardcore military advisors talking to the war boys and how that would be organised, even though it's set in the future, there's constants in how military people are organised. So we had advisors for them, but we needed something for the Five Wives, and Miss Giddy, the lady who's the sort of she appears in the movie, who's sort of their teacher as a way. And Eve Ensler was down in Australia, and I heard a radio interview. And I thought, this is exactly what these wives are going through.
Yeah.
And it turned out we had a mutual friend. So I called her and said, look, we're doing this movie. Would you do some workshopping? Because we need to find a way that they can, even though this whole movie is told on the run, you need to feel something authentic with them. And she's incredibly busy, but she happened to be in Africa at the time because she's doing amazing work there in Africa. And she came down to Namibia and worked with the girls, and it gave them a kind of a glue and common purpose and an understanding what went through. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of, it's stuff that kind of seeps onto the screen. I think you pick it up. They're just not turning up to the set. They've got some grounding.
Yeah.
So it was fantastic that she did that.
It was also thrilling to see that the group of older ladies, like ancient and still kicking ass.
Yeah, well, they were the remnants of a tribe. This wasteland has got many tribes, I guess.
Yeah.
Sort of new tribes. Or we go back to a kind of, even though it's like forward to the past, even though it's 45 to 50 years in a post-apocalyptic world, we go back to a medieval dark age. And so there's the tribe from which Furiosa, CHARLIZE's character, was stolen, when she was just a kid. And then she goes back to try to find them. And of course, what's left of them are the old ladies, but they're quite wild.
Yeah. They're gnarly. I love them. The one character or the one actor that you did bring back from the original Mad Max, Hugh.
Yeah.
What did he say when you called him up and said, I'm making another Mad Max, I've got this great role for you. I know you're TOECUTTER, but I've got something else entirely.
Look, if you know Hugh, he's such a wonderful guy. He just said, okay, I'm up for it. I mean, he's an amazing guy. He came down to Australia And on Mad Max, I knew nothing about acting when I made the first Mad Max. I'd never really been on a film set before. But he kind of created a gang of bikers.
Yeah.
And they rode around the city and literally wore their costumes and became a bikie gang. That bikie gang was the sort of heart of the movie. And he dies again at the end of the movie, the TOECUTTER. And all these years later, I thought, I need someone like that who's got the authority. And he became the warlord, you know. I mean, very playful, but he'd walk onto the set, and not only the war boys and the stunt crew, but some of the crew would go, you know, Immortan Joe. They'd give the sign of the V8. And he demanded, he said, everybody, you know, he'd say, Daddy's here, and he'd walk on, he'd be in his full costume and stuff. And it just gave it that sort of extra power.
Immortan Joe! He looked at me! He looked right at me! He looked at your blood bag! He turned his head, he looked me straight in the eye! He was scanning the horizon! No! I am awaited! I am awaited in Valhalla!
I heard he's quite method and that he kind of scared the wives a little bit on occasion.
Well, he'd help them. He would. He's not quite method where serious, very playful underneath, but he'd walk on and he would be scary. And there was one scene when Abby Lee, who plays the Dag, you know, because the whole thing's on the run. So I'm travelling in a vehicle. And I hear, oh, we need the medic. We've got a problem. We've got some of the breathing problems. But Abby Lee was hyperventilating. She's so into the role. It's the first time in the movie during the chase where he comes alongside and they see each other. He's in another vehicle and he just glared at her. And she said, look, I just got, you know, I brought all that stuff that we've learned, and, you know, he's so scary. And I thought, oh, well, it's fantastic. She's into it and he's into it. And she was fine, but it was... But, you know, they know deep down he's not, you know, he's really such a lovable, fun guy with a wicked sense of humour. So it really was great. But he did so much of my work for me. You know?
Did he?
Yeah, it was fantastic, you know.
The Namibian desert was a very harsh environment for you guys to be working in for 6 full months. I feel like it probably drove the crew and the cast a bit crazy.
Well, it's kind of, you know, the biggest problem by far is safety. Mm-hmm. Every day, it was 130 days, nearly 7 months of big stunt days. And you've got to be really on it to actually pull it off. We had a fantastic stunt crew and rigging crew and special effects crew. And if one thing goes wrong, just one thing goes wrong, you know, people could be really badly hurt. And so that was the biggest thing every day. And the bigger the stunt got, you had to sort of really worry about it. That takes its sort of toll just in terms of it being so arduous. But in a way, it also it makes everything feel that much more gritty and real.
And Tom Hardy, was he pretty game to get up on that polecat car and swing from side to side?
I really thought we'd be doing that CG. I didn't think we could actually get the physics right and actually travel because, you know, it would be too dangerous. But one day I looked up and everyone had figured out how to actually do it with wide wheelbases and so on. And then we had to get Tom up there, and it wasn't until he got up there that he told me he was uneasy with heights, but he did it. But, you know, they were really prepared to do it. When you see Max hanging upside down between the wheels of a massive war rig as it raced across the wasteland, that is Tom Hardy, and that's CHARLIZE and Nick Holt and everybody doing most of their stuff. You know, there's tremendous trust built with the stunt crew. It worked really, really well.
I was quite surprised to learn that you actually started off as a doctor back in Australia, and how you would treat a lot of people who had been in car accidents, but yet you went on to make these Mad Max films, and you were still very fascinated by cars and this violence and these chases. I thought it maybe might have put you off, but I guess not.
Well, it didn't. It was a way of dealing with it, really. I mean, I did my rotations in a big city hospital through emergency, and it, you know, I grew up in a remote rural town, great long roadways, and there was, you know, the car was just part of life growing up. And then when I went to the hospital, worked in the hospital, you know, I saw a lot of that. But also, I've always been interested in action movies, always. I just find it almost like a pure form of film language. You know, the film language was forged in the action movies of the silent era. When I go to the movies, you know, I want to be able to sit back in the darkness with everyone else and just get sucked up into the screen, and that's what we tried to do with this movie.
You didn't actually write a traditional script. Originally, it was all just 3,500 storyboards, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it was very visual for you.
Very, very visual. You know, Alfred Hitchcock said it best when he says, you try to make movies where they don't have to read the subtitles in Japan. And it's a visual medium, so as much as you can tell. I mean, people speak, but even the main characters, they don't say very much in the movie. The big screen and with all the sound that you can get now, and even with 3D, it can be a very, very immersive experience. And so you try to make movies, you know, rather than dramas, which play very well on the smaller screen. But for this, it needs to be big. Yeah.
And I was wondering how your work on Happy Feet perhaps informed your work on this Mad Max, and whether working with all that CGI and having that huge amount of freedom with Happy Feet then made you look at filmmaking differently.
For me, you know, I've always been interested in film. I was led by my curiosity, so I love working with the new technology. You know, when I read the first book, when I first read the book of Babe, it took us 10 years for digital technology to come along to make the big talk. And then when I saw the first motion capture from Lord of the Rings, that where they made Gollum move, I thought, oh, you can make the penguins dance. But the biggest thing I learned that you can, there's only one, you know, perfect place for the camera at any given moment. And when you're working with CG, you can have the same performance, the same lighting, everything's the same, but you can shift the story quite significantly by the way you use the camera. And so I was very, very careful to have a film which is, you know, a continuous chase, and make sure that the audience knew where they were at any moment. You really respect the geography, so it just doesn't become a blur of noise and movement.
A lot has been made of the practical stunts, the explosions. It looks incredible, but also the costume and makeup really adds to the film. I mean, it took it to the next level, I felt.
Well, everything has to have a logic. It's a pretty wild world that we're putting up there on the screen. But if it doesn't have an internal logic that everybody's working to, you kind of end up it being sort of chaotic and messy. And so we had to shed every bit of, you know, wardrobe, every weapon, every vehicle, even the language. Every character had a backstory. So in terms of the makeup, how that happened, that the war boys themselves, the half-lives, the guys like Nicholas Holt's character, Nux, they're not going to live that long, so they're looking to die bravely in battle. They scarify the engine parts on themselves, because they think of engines being more, more permanent, machines being more permanent than human beings. They do the sign of the V8 because they don't have books, they don't have television, they don't have internet, they don't have anything. All they know is that these things survived the apocalypse, so they're almost semi-religious artifacts. So a steering wheel is decorated, and so everyone works to sort of that. Even the doofwarrior who plays the guitar,
which is also a flamethrower, conveniently.
Yeah, and it's based on a hospital bedpan plus two.
Oh.
Yeah.
I did not notice that.
You don't notice. No, just put together. Everything had to be found objects repurposed.
Okay.
But done with a lot of love, because, just because it's the Wasteland, people don't lose their sense of aesthetic and beauty. So, and you find that no matter how impoverished. You might go to a township in South Africa and they can make the most beautiful stuff out of wire or an old Coke can. So that's what they're doing in this movie, and hopefully, again, it's another kind of glue.
And is it quite gratifying that now Babe, Pig in the City is kind of become a cult classic when it landed at the time it really didn't have that same resonance?
No, yeah, that happens. People see the worth of what you do over time, and the people. Yeah, I got so many letters about that movie. With the movies, you get different stories that obviously appeal to different people. So there's a whole group who, usually people into tap dancing really like the Happy Feet movies, and people who don't like the idea of pigs being eaten, are into the first Babe, and then the second Babe. It's sort of it's got its own thing going, and even you have a different kind of constituency on it in every movie. But that's, I think, one of the joys of being a storyteller, I think.
Yeah, and I like witches, so I love Witches of Eastwick. But I heard that you didn't have a very good experience on that film. It was sort of like turned you off Hollywood, right? It
was a crazy experience. I'd just done a Twilight Zone episode, and I'd worked with great people like Steven Spielberg and Joe Dante and Frank Marshall and Kathy Kennedy. They were serious filmmakers. And then I got on Witches of Eastwick, which was a kind of a worst case scenario in terms of the production team and not the producers and the studio. But I had the extreme good fortune of working with Jack Nicholson, who as a human being taught me more about life than just about anyone else. And he just kept me in that movie, and it was such a fantastic thing. He is a truly great human being, and that was just one of the great privileges of my life.
In the creating of these characters, you made some kind of Bibles for some of the bigger characters, like Nux, right?
Yeah.
And Furiosa.
Yeah.
And really built up their backstory.
Yeah.
Has that kind of planted the seed for maybe another Mad Max following these other characters?
Yeah, we did. We because of the delays, and because Nico Lathuris and I started to dig down deep. As I said, we wrote the backstories, not only for the characters, but the things, the vehicles and stuff. We found ourselves coming up with two other stories. And, if this movie does well enough, and I've got an appetite to go back into the Wasteland, there's we could do it. There's other films I want to make, but these characters don't seem to want to go away. So, and they're good stories. So when you're very driven by stories. It's so hard to make a movie. So you're thinking to yourself, okay, can this be a really powerful experience in the cinema? So that's what you're always sort of thinking of in the back of your mind. And, you go out there and you try to execute it with everything you know, and you put it together, and you sit there and go along for the ride, I hope.
George, thank you so much for joining us. Congratulations on Mad Max Fury Road.